Okay. All right. So, welcome to this session. We're going to focus on AI agent. Um, Yesterday we were, talking about large language model reasoning and particularly focus on, mathematics, either informal math or these formal way of do math reasoning and theorem proving. Today we're going to move to this large language model agent to see that how actually we can, in some cases, make use of this reasoning capability to interact with the environment to actually create this large language model. Our first guest speaker is Professor Neubig. He came from CMU and been working on machine learning and NLP interaction between the two fields. And today, we're going to talk about large language models that learn from experience. Please welcome Professor Neubig.
Great, thanks a lot. I will share my screen if that's okay.
Yeah, please. I will stop that.
And can everyone see?
Yes, no problem. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. So yeah, today I'd like to talk about LLM agents that learn from experience. This is mostly based on work by Zora Jiro Wang and Yuichi Song, who are two students in my lab. And the reason why I'm excited about learning from experience is that we kind of expect that agents will become part of our daily life. And in fact, they're part of my daily life. I use them for coding and web navigation tasks and various things like that all the time. But one thing you'll notice if you use agents all the time is that they keep on making the same mistakes over and over again. They work really well sometimes, but they fail in similar ways other times. And so we'd like to make them get more competent as we use them more, and maybe more personalized and follow our own personal, ways of doing things. And so today I want to talk about 3 research papers that we have done. All of them are available on arXiv, of course. And the first one is for web agents learning from memory. Also, web agents, I demonstrate that using APIs instead of kind of like clicking on the screen is a useful way to perform web tasks. And then finally, I talk about ways to induce useful APIs in general tasks. So let's get started. The first paper I'd like to talk about is agent workflow memory. And the basic idea is that agents tend to struggle particularly with complex long horizon tasks. So if they have create a repository named awesome DIY ideas that includes a README file with the links to the most active 6 DIY ideas on the DIY subreddit. This requires a lot of things to do on a website, and it requires specifically things like creating a repository, finding active ideas in a subreddit, and creating a file with content. So you can kind of break it down into certain workflows. And so what we want to do here is we want to learn a set of reusable workflows that generalize to arbitrarily complex tasks. And the way we do this is through a method called agent workflow memory. The method itself is not all that complex. The basic idea is that as the agent performs actions in an online fashion, it will obtain actions by doing a set of actions using an LLM agent. We then do trajectory evaluation, where we evaluate whether the task was successful or not. And then from these successful trajectories, we induce workflows. And this is relatively straightforward. What you do is you just use any agent framework that you're using to solve a task. The trajectory evaluation part is a little bit tricky. Basically, you need to have a model that can distinguish between good and bad trajectories. And there's a couple ways you can do this. The first way you can do this is by just asking a language model whether the agent was successful at following the task. The other way you can do this is by training a model to distinguish between trajectories. And in our case, we use the prompted version, but training models is also good way to do this. Specifically with respect to how we induce workflows, the way we do this is we take experiences, we feed them into a large language model, and we extract workflows. And our requirements are that these workflows would be reusable and ideally remove example-specific context. So the way we do this is we first ask a language model to segment the trajectory from the segment the long successful trajectory into subsegments. And we further ask it to basically apply to provide a name for each of these subsegments. And then finally, we try to essentially anonymize the specific things like departure city, anonymize like Seattle into departure location and other stuff like this. And all of this, we're essentially just relying on prompted large language models to do this for us. We live in an age where we can just ask a language model to do this, and it does it with a reasonable level of accuracy. So the overall method is maybe somewhat straightforward. I think the thing that's most exciting about this is kind of a first demonstration that this sort of learning from memory is actually very effective. And we did it in two particular settings. The first one is when we already have additional examples available. So these would be things like training examples that were annotated by humans or synthesized by language models. And the other one is when only the test queries are available. And what this means is we essentially have an agent that learns in an online setting where it gets requests from a user over and over and over again. And as it gets more requests from the user, it will improve in its accuracy. And I'm much more excited about the online setting than the offline setting because, we can create annotated training data, but it would be a lot more, exciting if we could just let an agent out in the world and have it continuously improve without having to annotate training data from that, domain. So we experimented with these agents on web navigation tasks, and we evaluated on Web Arena and Mind2Web. Web Arena is interesting because it's a web navigation task that's very realistic. It has real sites that you can run over. It has rigorous evaluation based on function correctness. But the downside to it is there's only 812 test queries, and the domains are somewhat limited. They don't have, a very broad variety of domains. So we also evaluated on Mind2Web, which is maybe a little bit less realistic in terms of its evaluation, but it has more tasks and websites that were covered. So as I said, one of the most exciting things about agent workflow memory is that at the time, this basically was able to achieve a state-of-the-art success rate on Web Arena, which is, a benchmark that a lot of people are competing on. And the way we did this was we started out with this BrowserGym baseline, and we essentially applied agent workflow memory, and that was able to double the overall success rate that we had here. And interestingly, it also reduced the number of steps that were used. So it allowed us to go from 7.9 steps to solve tasks to 5.9 steps. And an interesting thing is if you compare it with human engineered workflows that were kind of basically manually created by a human that looked at the Web Arena tasks, our induced workflows were able to achieve, very similar results. So one thing also that is interesting is if you go from kind of starting at 0 and then applying agent workflow memory and all the way to the end of any particular like website, we could see that there's a rapid learning phase where at the very beginning, it learns a whole bunch of workflows and increases its accuracy. And then there's kind of an inference phase afterwards where it's learned the workflows that it should be using and it, remains at high accuracy. And so this is a comparison between when we applied agent workflow memory and when we did not apply agent workflow memory. And it looks like both agent workflow memory and the baseline are improving, but like actually the baseline just is more or less stabilizing at its overall rate of 15%. But you can see that very quickly we get a difference of 10 percentage points, and then as we go farther, we get a difference of 20 percentage points. So you can see that it learns to utilize these workflows relatively well. One possible criticism of agent workflow memory is that you might be kind of overfitting to the specific tasks that are included in a particular website or in a particular data set. And that is true to some extent. You'll certainly do better if you apply it when you are on the on a particular website or a particular task. But we demonstrate that there is some level of cross-task generalization as well. We have a limited amount of time, so I kind of will go through the Mind2Web results relatively quickly, but we demonstrate that on Mind2Web, we're able to achieve some level of generalization. So for the next part, I would like to switch gears a little bit. And so this is not about agents that learn from experience, but this is about agents that use workflows or use a different interface to interact with the environment in a very particular way. And specifically, I want to talk about using APIs. And so existing web agents typically operate with the space of graphical user interfaces. And so they simulate things like keyboards and mouse operations, such as clicking and typing, and act on websites. And specifically, there are some that look directly at the web page kind of image. There are others that look at the HTML of the web page, but the ones that I talked about on Web Arena and Mind2Web in the previous section are operating on something that looks a little bit like the simplified HTML here. And this simplified HTML, it's called the accessibility tree, has a number of issues with it. So the first issue is that language models are not super familiar with interacting with, this sort of kind of representation of a web page. The other problem is that you need to click, you need to scroll, you need to enter text and things like this. And this is just a lot of actions to get something done. And so our research question is, whether we really want to be doing this sort of thing where we simulate human behavior and whether that's an optimal solution for getting tasks done on the web. So it's the old adage of if you want to fly, do you design something that looks like a bird or do you design an aircraft? And in the end, the latter has been more successful in getting humans from places to places. So we implemented a baseline browsing agent. It operates on accessibility trees, can navigate arbitrary web pages, performs reasonably well on simpler layouts. And so this is our baseline. It's also the baseline that we used in the agent workflow memory paper. But the challenges are the complexity of the accessibility tree structures, like I mentioned, many LLMs not being familiar with this. When content is not immediately visible, it also can be tricky to navigate because you need to scroll, you need to change pages, other things like this. And so a failure example is asking how many commit commits did saptax make to the A11Y project. And so the agent, what it tries to do is it tries to browse, it tries to go to getlab.com, log in with credentials, click the project, click commits, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. And eventually it runs out of time and says no commits were found. So it concluded that 0 commits were made. But on the other hand, we have another alternative interface to interacting with our environment. So this can be things like API calling. And this gives us a direct interface for machines to communicate with web services, reduces operational complexity, and ideally will end up with better results. And if we look at what are APIs, they're predefined endpoints to allow computers to efficiently execute tasks. And they, enable interaction via get, post, put, these sorts of requests, and return structured data such as JSON. And the interesting thing is a lot of the websites that we use on standard benchmarks like WebArena already have APIs. So in many cases, these APIs already exist. And so if we just were able to use them appropriately, we would be able to, interact with the websites through APIs. So in many cases, we just did this. Sometimes we have APIs, but the documentation is not very well done. But fortunately, this is also something that LLMs are quite good at. So you can just ask an LLM to generate documentation for the API. This is an example API doc. So it's kind of tells you the attribute, the type of the attribute, the description of the attribute, and what the output of the API would be. And the way you can perform API calling is essentially by just calling code. So you can have requests.get and call that API. And that's an example of the response. So then what we examined is what if we were to take tasks traditionally tackled by browsing agents and give AI agents access to APIs? And so this is our API-based agent. The way we implemented this was just using a standard coding agent in our agent framework, OpenHands, and we gave it access to the APIs in a way that I'll talk next. But before I do that, I'd like to demonstrate how much easier this makes this task. So essentially, before we were stepping through and making many different steps across the website and other things like this. But in this particular case, you can solve the task by just doing like 3 lines of Python. So then the question is, given the benefits of API calling, should we discard web browsing altogether? And of course, the answer is no. So if we looked at an error distribution of 100 randomly sampled tasks when we provided APIs to the model, there were several, actually about 1/3 of them were actually correct, but just the validator from WebArena judged them as wrong. But 50% were just unsolvable by APIs. And the reason why is because not all websites provide comprehensive API support. They don't all have good API documentation. And there's complexity in adapting to new websites. So one of our solutions to this was to create a hybrid agent. And so this is an agent that's capable of interleaving browsing and API calling actions. And at each step, it would choose between communicating with humans in natural language, generating and executing Python code, which could include APIs, and performing web browsing actions. And we choose the action based on the quality of the current APIs that we have available. So just to give a little bit more detail about how we do this, our prompt to the agent was essentially that it should try to use APIs if sufficient APIs existed. But if sufficient APIs did not exist, it could resort back to browsing. And then at the end of its trajectory, when it was done with everything it needed to do, we asked the agent to go to a web page that provided the answer to the user. So the idea would be like maybe it would use API calls, but it would display them on the web. And this also helps with the Web Arena evaluations that require you to travel to a particular URL. So we evaluated on Web Arena is our agent framework. We used OpenHands, which is a kind of like coding/browsing agent that we're developing. And if you look at the agent performance, we evaluated it across a number of website categories, and we found very large improvements by moving to APIs on particular categories. So like on GitLab and on Map, we found a large improvement by moving to APIs and shop. On Reddit and in Min, we found a smaller improvement by moving to APIs, but we got a larger improvement when we switched over to using a hybrid agent. And so then the question might be, why is this the case? And one thing is that API quality matters. So GitLab and Map have very good APIs. They allow you to do most of the things that you need to do on the site. Shopping and admin are kind of okay. And on the Reddit style task, the API coverage was very poor. So this did, and on Reddit, essentially what we did was we looked at all of the APIs and we actually wrote a few new APIs. It wasn't a very large number of them, but we manually wrote a few of them. And that doubled our accuracy on Reddit using the API calling agent. So it is kind of important that you have quality APIs for the site. And just looking at the time, maybe I'll skip through the case study so we have some time to discuss at the end. But in terms of future directions that we had for this work, one of them was obtaining or generating suitable APIs. So how can we automatically generate APIs over websites so that we would be able to, call a function without requiring the agent to already have that function available beforehand. And improving retrieval and utilization of endpoints. So we might have very extensive APIs and then how to filter them out. So the final thing is we've made some initial steps in the direction of also learning from experience to create things that look like APIs or to create things that look like reusable functions that we could use. This was not done directly in the web agent framework, although we have some ongoing work that is doing it within agentic frameworks. And if we look at, so what we did, it was more in the general direction of kind of like tool using agents for tool use for non-agentic tasks. And so if we think about what tools are, tools can be, application-specific software, real-world APIs, expert-designed functions for things like image processing, other stuff like this. And can we make tools to improve task performance automatically? And basically, that's what we examined in this paper, Trove, inducing verifiable and efficient toolboxes for solving programmatic tasks. And the way we did this is we moved from built-in functions to more complex tools, from external libraries to more complex tools, or from expert-crafted functions for things like image understanding to more complex tools. And if we look at why tool making helps, it's kind of a similar story to what we had when we were talking about calling APIs for web browsing agents. But basically, if we look at the primitive functions that we might have for solving a task like the table shows how many days of vacation Austin had taken each year, what was the rate of change between 2015 and 2016. We could implement this just in pandas, which is maybe fine. But if we have a more, complex function for calculating the rate of change that we could reuse over and over again, this will make our solutions more, concise and also make it possible to improve accuracy. So we're not the first people to come up with tool induction methods, but they had some problems. So there are methods that basically use primitive tools. Like I said before, these are tedious, complex, and prone to error. And then there were a lot of methods to do tool induction, but many of them needed extra training, had complex pipelines, or resulted in tools that were not highly reusable. So these were kind of some issues that we wanted to tackle. And a big issue with this is that a lot of the tools were not reusable in very nice and concise ways. So for example, this calc rate tool was induced, but it specifically calculated a rate over year and vacation days. So it was not very generalizable. So if we look at how Trove makes tools, the pipeline is basically you take in streaming data, you have a code language model that outputs a toolbox, you instantiate it with an empty toolbox, and in an online fashion, you create new tools and generate programmatic solutions with these tools. And you sample multiple solutions, and if you get a good solution that uses a tool, you add it back to the toolbox. And a very important thing that we use in this method is recently a lot of people have been talking about how you can use more test time compute to get good, better solutions. But we are taking a similar approach here of taking more test time compute to get better solutions and using those to identify which tools are appropriate to be adding back to our toolbox. And specifically what we do is we do agreement-based selection. So we take in a question and have the environment. We generate in 3 different modes. The first mode is importing tools from the existing toolbox, so basically reusing tools that we already have. The second one is creating new tools, so we explicitly ask the model to create new tools. And then the third one is skipping and not using tools at all. And so we generate multiple solutions from these multiple methods, and then we group all of the solutions based on which one has the highest agreement. And so if we select the one with the highest agreement, we can then find the tools that were used in the one that have the highest agreement, and then put them back into the toolbox, basically. That allows us to choose which tools are the better tools without actually knowing the answer at test time. So this also allows us to do the kind of test time online induction that I introduced in agent workflow memory. Another thing that's very important for this is we do periodic toolbox trimming. So we remove things from the toolbox that are not used very frequently. And this is good because it allows us to induce kind of a concise set of tools that can be used. So we evaluated this on a pretty wide variety of tasks, from math to table-based question answering and visual question answering. And we evaluate with respect to 3 metrics. The first one is answer correctness. So this kind of speaks for itself because we want our answers to be correct. The second one is solution complexity. So this is the number of operations that you take when you are solving the task. And the final one is toolbox size. So this is how big is the set of tools that you end up using to achieve these results. And on the bottom, on the first one, we have the primitive technique that tries to just solve by directly, solving the problem. The second one is where we try to induce new tools for each instance. So basically, for each instance, we induce a new toolbox and try to use that. And then Trove is the one that I proposed, where we induce reusable tools. And we can see that basically Trove gets good accuracy across all of the tasks that we tried, um, better than the primitive solutions, better than instance level tool induction. And it reduces the number of operations that we use, and it has a small reusable library. So one final thing that I'd like to talk about a little bit is from the point of view of safety and kind of reliability, it's also very useful to have results that are easily verifiable. So like if a human uses an agent to solve a task, it would be good if the human would be able to decide whether that result is correct or not. And one of the good things about Trove is that it allows humans to relatively easily verify if the answer is correct. So we had human participants look at the outputs of the primitive, instance level, and Trove methods. And we can see that there's almost a 10-point increase in the ability of humans, the same humans, to verify whether the outputs are correct or not. And also they are able to verify the outputs much more quickly. So it's more accurate and faster. One interesting thing is that we were able to induce diverse tools across domains. So you can see that for math, we induce things like calculate remainder. For table QA, we induce things like get match after condition, where we get the match that comes after the match that satisfies the condition in the specified column. And we have things like get object region in visual QA. And there's some overlap between them, which is interesting, but there's also some lack of overlap between them. We also did some ablation studies, including the robustness to example ordering. So we check whether it's important to have things in the original order, or if we shuffle, whether that would make a difference. And we also demonstrate the importance of periodic toolbox trimming. So we can demonstrate that we get a 74% size reduction in the tools that we induce if we do this, or even up to 90. So yeah, that's what I have about Trove. And so these are three works. Again, all of them are on arXiv. You can check them out if they look interesting. And I wrote the takeaways here. The thing I'd like to talk about, if we have a little bit of time, is current and future directions. So some future directions that I'm thinking about are, can we induce APIs for complex agentic tasks? And we have some preliminary positive results with respect to this on web tasks, but it's kind of tricky. And the reason why is because maybe twofold. Like if you are building APIs for web tasks, unlike the programmatic APIs that we had access to in the second work that I introduced, you don't directly have access to the database. So you essentially need to come up with generalizable ways to work on a website that you can express as an API, and that's a bit tricky. Another thing is, how do you come up with APIs that, for example, generalize across websites? So you create the login API for Amazon, but you also want the login API for Amazon to work when you log into GitHub. And that's, not an easy topic. What is the best representation for agent memory? Is it prompts, kind of like past trajectories like AWM? Is it APIs like Trove? Is it something else? I'm not sure. So that's a good question. And another thing is, can we combine this sort of learning with exploration? So we're thinking a little bit about how we can explore on websites, how we can explore over various websites and, induce APIs that work well on them without actually getting feedback from the users. So that would allow us to better understand how the websites work and, come up with APIs in advance. And then we'd have a good place to start if we had a new user of the agent. So yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about today. I left about 10 minutes so we can have questions and discussion if anybody is interested in these topics.
Thank you. Do we have any question from the audience?
Can I have a question?
Go ahead,
Yeah,
please.
for sure.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your great talk. I'm Moonfang from the University of Liverpool. I'm currently also working on agents. So I'm curious. So for web agents, it seems that the agent mainly works on the HTML and texture information. So what's your opinion? So now we humans, right? We can process the visual information. So what's your opinion or thoughts on web agents with the vision module or some like the VL module based agents?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's different interaction modalities. So I think you need to think about your observation space, and I think you need to think about your action space in agents. Those are the two fundamentals, right? And so in terms of observation spaces, I think we need to have visual observation spaces because there are some tasks that cannot be solved without visual observation spaces. For example, I want a blue shirt that is I want a light blue shirt or something like that. If you go on Amazon, the agent should be able to look at the image to find a light blue shirt for you. There's also some other, slightly more tricky things like, maybe you want to handle an Excel sheet or something like that. And it would just be very hard for you to express an Excel sheet in a very, verbose textual format and things. So I think we definitely need visual observation spaces. Recently, there have been things like the Claude computer use and the OpenAI UAM that both have visual observation spaces, and they're trying to just like click on a place on the screen or other things like this. And I think that this is an interesting and very ambitious approach, but I actually think that this might be kind of a bad idea because while it is very general, like in our API-based agents paper, we demonstrated that you can just do way better, way faster with an action space that is more tailored to agents. So I think having visual observations, but having kind of programmatic action spaces might be the best way to go in the long run, but I don't know. I don't know exactly how things are going to work. And of course, if you require APIs specifically tailored to that site, that reduces your generality. So there are like disadvantages with respect to that too.
Thank you so much. My another question is that currently your methods based on APIs works very well. So I saw some projects that use cursor or pointer. So what's your opinion about the difference between them, or which direction do you prefer in future?
So I think the cursors or the pointers are interesting because they're very general, but I don't think they're the long-term solution. I think my personal opinion is that humans and machines don't need to interact with computers in the same way, and cursors and pointers are very useful for humans who are not able to program. But even us as programmers, I think we don't like clicking on lots of buttons, right? Instead, we prefer to write a program that solves our problems for us. And since agents are so good at writing code, I feel like they could do a much better job if they just write code to solve their problems as opposed to clicking on lots of UI elements.
Got it. Thank you so much. Thank you for your excellent talks. Thank you.
Thanks. Professor Neubig, is that this approach agnostic to the large language model? It's in terms of the performance. Have you tested out with various of language model? Which one better? Which one?
Yeah, so for Trove, we tested various language models, and it worked pretty well with all of them. In terms of the web agents, I feel like most models are not good web agents. So only like GPT-4 and Claude I have gotten to be reasonably successful web agents. Almost all models are good at writing code, but they're not all good at being like code writing agents. So in general, code seems to be a better interface for weaker models at the moment anyway. It might change in the future, but like that's my current understanding.
Okay, I have another question. A lot of people, particularly the people, not really in the research field, they are more not outside, for example, machine learning community. They ask that, because this reasoning, like DeepSeek R1 and all this O1 have a strong reasoning, sort of they should say, do we really, do all this reasoning, strong reasoning models, they will be even stronger in the future. So what is the agent problem? Is that agent agent problem solved? I try to answer it, but I don't really think my answer is sort of satisfying at the moment. What do you think about this this question?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends what you mean by reasoning. I can tell you one problem that's not solved by reasoning, which is given an underspecified command from a user to make the best design decisions about how to solve that underspecified command. So we know if you're familiar with reasoning, you know about like deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning and other things like this. Deductive reasoning is very often what we talk about when we talk about reasoning models, because it's like, given this math problem, these axioms or these tools that we have in our math toolbox, go and solve the problem. And that, I think, may get very good, especially because we have ability to train on text and stuff like this. But on the other hand, it's like, which math problem should I solve next is a hard problem, right? Like, which one is the most important one? Or even if we're starting doing reasoning, like, what reasoning method should I use in order to solve this math problem most efficiently? Like, if we're getting to really hard, like competition level math problems, and there might be a really, really convoluted, really difficult way to do it that you would eventually solve, or there might be a simple and elegant way where you just use, a few theorems. And so I think basically models, even if they have good deductive reasoning abilities, I don't know if they'd necessarily have good taste about how to solve problems or what solutions to pick, and that's a very big issue. So that's definitely missing. Other things like O1 is not a very good agent model, just because it hasn't been trained as an agent model. And some things it's missing are like error recovery, making sure that it tries a different solution when a certain solution is not working right now. Other things like this. And so I think there are a set of like agent skills that are a little bit orthogonal to reasoning skills, but I think we'll need both of them in order to solve agents.
Yeah, yeah, all right. Yeah, agree. And you mentioned about this learning. Maybe can you elaborate a bit more on the learning part of it? I think you mentioned in the early start of your talk, saying learning by example. Yeah, so I just wondering, because we've been working on this sort of case-based reasoning and also sort of online learning. I think how this online learning would able to help. I like the idea of that you have this foundation model, then not necessarily fine-tuning is a solution, but maybe that we have a maybe cheaper, much more effective solution. So how do you view about this sort of online learning kicking in? How can they actually, with a limited number of iterations, the model can actually understand the problem, therefore can solve the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I proposed some solutions to this with AWM or something, and that requires no data at all. We've also tried, no fine-tuning at all. We've also tried some fine-tuning solutions, and we haven't had fine-tuning be as successful as prompting yet. My overall impression, we've also done some research on long context in context learning, where we found that in context learning is actually more data efficient than fine-tuning at very small numbers of training examples. And so I think actually right now, I would definitely prefer in context learning over fine-tuning until it gets like you have so many in context examples that, it's too costly to continue. But yeah.
Okay, thanks. Do we have any other question? Maybe we can have one more from the audience.
Okay. If not, thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thanks a lot for giving a talk here. Thank you very much. I think it's definitely very exciting work.
Thanks.
Okay.